A business boost for a special girl selling cookies. We first introduced you to Colette on Friday. She was born with Down syndrome, and after having difficulty finding a job herself, she decided to start her own business.
WBZ's Ryan Kath is here tonight. And Ryan, since our story aired Friday, she's gotten attention from all across the country.
Yeah, Liam, the community in Boston and beyond immediately responded to Colette's story, and tonight she tells us her dream is coming true.
Colette DeVito has always had a passion for baking. But when the 26-year-old who was born with Down syndrome couldn't find a paying job, she decided she'd become her own boss, and that's how her cookie business took shape.
You faced rejection.
I did, yes.
You're out to prove a lot of people wrong.
Exactly, yes.
And she's well on her way. As we told you last week, Colette already landed her first client at the Golden Goose Market in the North End.
You know, we kind of fell in love with her.
But the small business owner is going to have to start buying her ingredients in bulk.
I cannot believe this is actually happening right now.
Since her story aired, Colette has received orders for her chocolate chip cookies dipped in cinnamon all over the country, from New York to California.
It's incredible.
A step closer to her dream of growing big enough to hire other people who have faced the same obstacles.
So much more than her cookies. It's about disabilities, getting jobs for everyone that deserve the jobs.
How busy is she going to be in the next few days?
Oh, she's going to be so busy. We keep telling her that. We're like, you have the fame now, but the hard work is coming soon.
One of the consistent themes throughout this course has been the implicit biases that, in some form or fashion, cause us to think in exclusionary terms. Consider these images. Can we really infer that any one of these people are, or someday may be, a doctor, or a classical violinist, or an artist, or a doctoral student? Of course, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual identity, or socioeconomic status should not be a determiner. And one of the main reasons we want to check our biases is because we might accidentally act as though these determiners are harbingers of ability. But what happens if ability is the determiner? What happens if a person is limited in some form or fashion? How can we understand diversity in organizations in terms of ability and disability? The Americans with Disabilities Act, as amended in 2008, defines disability as a functional limitation of a daily life activity. These daily life activities might include things like walking, or eating, or communicating, or learning, things that most people do on a daily basis. They might not include other activities like knitting, or playing basketball, or memorizing lists of random numbers. Some people may do these daily, but the majority of us do not. So, if we're describing a disability as a limitation of a daily life activity, and if these are activities that most people do daily, then those who have functional limitations of those activities are a minority. In fact, the World Health Organization estimates that disability is the largest minority population. Tatarin and Trucan-Tatarin asserted that all of us, at some point in our lives, are a part of this minority population. It's really just a question of how long we'll be a part of that minority. Historically, we tend to think of disabilities as functional limitations in physical activities, seeing, hearing, walking, etc. In more recent decades, however, we've begun to recognize that there are also people who have functional limitations that are invisible or more easily hidden, like learning disabilities, psychiatric disabilities, or some medical disabilities that are not readily observable by others. In the case of invisible disabilities, a person might experience functional limitations in learning, or working, or communicating with others. So one of the distinctions we're making here is in terms of ability. This is unique in conversations about diversity. For example, I would like to investigate biases that assume that men can read better than women. That bias assumes something that is A, not rational, and B, potentially harmful. But when we're talking about distinctions of ability, we're actually describing how some people experience difficulties where others do not. I think one of the best ways we can carefully check potential bias is investigating whether we can make assumptions that one limitation is correlated to another. For example, Is a person who experiences challenges in walking necessarily less intelligent than a person who can walk? Is a person who has Down syndrome necessarily less entrepreneurial than persons who don't have Down syndrome? Is a person who stutters necessarily a poorer communicator than a person who doesn't stutter? We make a lot of assumptions about correlations of ability that are also A, not rational, and B, potentially harmful. Cerebral palsy is a perfect example of this assumed correlation. Current estimates are that about 2/3 of all persons with cerebral palsy have some form of intellectual disability. But that leaves another third of all persons with cerebral palsy who experience no limitations of intellectual function. Intellectual disabilities are an associative condition with cerebral palsy, but they are not always correlated. The example of Colette's growing bakery illustrates a couple of important points for us. It is, of course, wonderful that she has taken her passion for baking and found a way to create something that others want to buy. But did you notice that she was not able to find a job working in someone else's bakery? If she had applied to my bakery, and I made assumptions about her abilities, then my company actually suffered because I made assumptions that her disability meant that she couldn't do something that, frankly, she does very well. Colette's desire to employ others with disabilities is an unfortunate marker that, hate it or loathe it, we make assumptions about abilities of persons with functional limitations. This fits within the paradigm of Kahneman and Frederick's description of attribute substitution. In summary, our brains are lazy. When our brains are primed with the concept of disability, we may expand that attribute to the whole person, rather than go through the cognitive math to determine whether that belief is actually true. This is one of several reasons why, in the case of disabilities, many are inclined to practice the language of person-first descriptions. Instead of saying, Bill is blind, we might prefer to say, Bill is a person with visual impairment. Asserting the personhood and the unique set of gifts and disabilities gives me a chance to check my assumptions about Bill's visual impairment. Bill has a functional limitation of a daily life activity, seeing. But Bill is not a functional limitation. Taking care in the ways in which we think about or speak about functional limitations is a way to practice a kind of hospitality, one where we're open to the potential ways another person may bring richness to our community, or to our team, or to our organization. When I worked for Texas Instruments, our team manager was interviewing candidates to join the speech recognition group. We were teaching computers to understand human speech, and so we talked a great deal to our computers. Raja found a candidate who seemed to have everything he wanted in a potential employee. But during the interview, Raja noticed that the employee stuttered rather significantly. Raja became concerned that this would potentially limit the prospective employee's ability to do his job. But to Raja's credit, he asked the prospect, "I noticed that you stutter. Would this pose a problem for you to work on our team?" Raja asked the right question. In fact, the prospect was very fluent when he spoke to computers, so there was really no problem in hiring him. He would be very able to do the work. Raja's question illustrated a willingness to learn about the prospective employee's disability, but also about the prospect's abilities. Raja's willingness to be open to the potential ways that the prospect could contribute to the team was empowering to us all. It led me to believe that Raja was the kind of leader who would carefully consider the ways all of us were able to contribute to our objectives. So I would like to invite you to consider the conversations about disability through a different lens, one of ability. When we meet people who have functional limitations of daily life activities, I think Raja's approach is a very valuable one. Carefully discern, or even outright ask, what contributions that individual might bring to an organization. As we see in the video about Colette, there are a few bakery organizations that have clearly missed out on bringing her abilities to their organization's objectives.